So this is a fill-in.
Yes.
No topical references.
Or
You're
if
right.
they are, we'll make them funny.
Spider-Man, where are you coming from?
Nobody knows who you are.
Cool.
I do. J. Jonah Jameson does now.
But not in the Electric Company universe.
Well,
That's Earth EC, right? No, maybe not.
All I know is that character's dead. As is the Spider-Man on the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. The only one left alive out of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was Ms. Lion.
You're lying! You're lying!
and we're wasting all this wonderful goodness.
I know, but that's what what do you call it? Teasers are for.
I suppose.
Dun, 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 dun. No. I hear it in my head.
The other thing I'm wasting time with on the YouTubes, I finally found. Remember how when the new TV season would start, they would have a special where they would, have some sort of goofy thing to explain all the new series?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I used to love the Saturday morning one too. I lived for that on Friday nights.
Yep, that's what I'm watching.
Cool.
I didn't realize there were so many cartoons on ABC's schedule in 1961.
Oh yeah, almost every half hour. Very few hour shows.
But they had Top Cat, and they had what was it? The Fun Day Show, which was a bunch of the Harvey characters, believe it or not. Flintstones was still on. What was the other one? I can't remember that, but there was like 4 primetime cartoons, and it's like, wow. But instead,
Spider-Man, where are you coming from, Spider-Man? Nobody knows who you are. Spider-Man, you got that Spidey touch, Spider-Man. You are a web-slinging star.
Hello and welcome once again to Crazy Comics and Stories. It's me, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. And at the other end of the series of tubes and wires, and probably the reason we are using this fill-in episode, is Joe, Crazy Writer. How you doing today, Joe?
That is true. You've only got one gallbladder. However, I've got 2 hips, so maybe that's why I'm not around. So you had to reach into the dusty vault and pull out this here fill-in episode.
It's a product of the dreaded deadline doom.
Doom, the dreaded deadline doom.
Although, sadly enough, it's not written by Bill Mantlo and drawn by Sal Buscema.
Yeah, there is that.
They were the ones who did most of the fill-ins.
Very filling.
Although there were a few that were drawn by Don Heck.
Just for the heck of it, right?
I actually just found out some interesting information about Don Heck.
Oh, I will sit back and listen.
Well, he was around Marvel in the early days, and then if you remember, by the 70s, I would say the late 70s, he went over and got a job at DC, and I found out why. Through the 70s, he was tired of having to, as he would tell people, stage the stories. DC worked full script in the 70s. Marvel, you would get a 2-page plot. And he much preferred having a script to work from rather than having to do all the fight scenes and everything, because he didn't feel he was very good at doing the fight scenes. He wanted someone to choreograph them for him. So I found that very interesting that Don Heck, who, while he's not celebrated as one of the creators of Marvel, he was there at the very earliest time during the early 60s and actually lasted up through the... I think he was the last of the artists from the Silver Age of Marvel who he was the last one to leave.
Darn him to heck.
And now we know why.
Or should I say darn him to heck?
When I was a kid, I didn't much care for his art. Now I really enjoy it because I've seen the stuff he did in the 50s, and his 50s horror art is just amazing. Not a big fan of the superhero stuff.
Yeah, I wasn't big on Iron Man either. It was probably one of the last books I jumped into, and even that was probably in the 80s, around the time he was going for alcohol round 2. And
so that was the Bob Layton.
Bob came back in the Transformer armor, big red.
But we're not here to talk about the Iron Man.
Or bore you to heck.
No, we're going to talk about a Fave 5. I love the Fave 5 episodes. These are our Fave 5 Spider-Man villains.
And you want to know something? I could only come up with about 4.
See, that surprises me because when it comes to the Rogues Gallery, I think Spider-Man's is the best at Marvel. And in all of comics, I think only Batman has a better Rogues Gallery. I think Batman has better villains. But I think Spider-Man's villains, especially the ones, that Ditko created in the early days, and even, the stuff that came in the 70s and 80s. There's a fondness for how silly they were.
I thought, I thought of the top 3 right away, and then I had to go to Wikipedia and I look at their villain list, and there is really nobody that I would think is so quintessential with Spider-Man that as soon as he shows up, or her, I would oh my gosh, I cannot wait till the next issue. There are villains that had good runs that I enjoyed. I mean, the original Black Cat run, that was during my whole Golden Age period. Remember, I started at 178, and that was just right before 200. Hobgoblin run was good, and I even kind of the aborted end of it. They killed him off in one thing, not realizing, we still need him. And really getting him excited about the big wheel. You just can't get enough of that Jackson wheelie, But
how about Cyclone, the French supervillain when Spider-Man was over in Europe?
And I've got to admit, there are certain ones that everybody, Venom. He's not one of my top 5 faves. And a lot of the villains that I originally liked, like Kingpin, when Spider-Man and Kingpin got together, you knew there was going to be a smackdown. But he actually came more into his own when he started dicking around in Miller's Daredevil.
Well, I thought, there are all kinds of villains that are Spider-Mans that are fun. Anytime Stegron the Dinosaur Man shows up, I'm going to be happy, just because the writers use him, in a very fun way, or the Ringer.
That
or
would be the
Boomerang.
However the writer makes an older villain, I don't know, let's pick out the Kangaroo. If you can make him interesting, I'm more than willing to enjoy it. And I've got mine rated from what I figured my top 5 is a countdown more. So we'll go from what I consider whatever to probably his quintessential villain.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you did the same or if you just picked 5.
I picked my 5 favorites.
And as usual, I usually go do a little sideball on it because I stopped to think what were some of my favorite stories, even to this day, that I would pull out the omnibuses, or even crank up the old Marvel Universe and look for it. And the number one fights that I absolutely love are anytime he goes head-to-head with another hero. And again, I'm not talking necessarily current run because he's pretty much fought everybody. Although I do got to admit the run where he fought the X-Men single-handedly in Secret Wars was cool. I'm talking the Jim Shooter one. Or was it Marvel Team Up 100 when he fought the possessed Fantastic Four to a standstill?
That could be, yeah.
Those were fun. But we're talking back in the golden age of Marvel, especially when they first met. And those were just some of the more fun things. Even the first Spider-Man issue where he goes head to head with the Fantastic Four in a misunderstanding. Fortunately, Marvel was really good at that. It wasn't necessarily the hero. I mean, even was it? Maybe it was. There was an issue where the Avengers were talking about Spider-Man, and the Wasp was like, well, I don't like Spider-Man. We're natural enemies. And really, she was just being kind of a prissy poo because she hadn't even met Spider-Man yet, and she already disliked him. So for me, that was probably some of the more magical stuff. Nowadays, you see the misunderstandings, Secret Wars, Civil War. You know, if you make the fight big and huge, it's going to catch my attention. But those one-on-ones where they met for the first time are just absolutely brilliant.
Well, and the early Marvel team-ups. It was, okay, first they fight. They've got some misunderstanding. First they fight, then they go after the bad guy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that, of course, you know, for decades, it was Spider-Man is the considered a bad guy because of J. Jonah Jameson's editorials.
Yep. He was framed for Captain Stacy's murder. And again, for me, that was my golden age of comics because a couple issues after 178, he was pardoned for all those crimes. And he actually referred to one of the trade paperbacks that, or mass market paperbacks that they published at that time that I had read. So I was kind of like, oh, I'm in the know with what the hell they're talking about. So they kind of took away all that. And he graduated college. It was like, holy cow, they're doing some major league stuff with Spider-Man, and I just got on board. Woohoo! So yeah, any good first time meeting, misunderstanding, fight, or even sometimes like, was it Liefeld's and McFarlane's crossover with X-Force when he shows up and he kind of takes control. Listen, kids, you don't understand. You don't stop Juggernaut by throwing things at him. It wasn't really a fight with them, but, you know, just a first meeting. So they're rare and they're special. And, you know, you really got to come up with some convoluted circumstances now to get these guys to actually lay down. Well, not really. It's Marvel, but, you know. So what you got for number 5?
Number 5 is The Punisher. I still think of the Punisher as a Spider-Man villain because that's how he first showed up. He became popular enough to have like multiple series. But one of the things that both Gary Conway and Kurt Busiek have said recently really informed my decision, and I almost wish someone would write a Punisher series like this. Gary Conway said that the Punisher is a bad guy. He was kind of the vigilante hero that everyone accused Spider-Man of being. But when he first created him, Punisher would work for anybody who could pay him and kind of convince him that whoever he was going after was a criminal. Because, remember, he went after Spider-Man because the Jackal paid him to. And the Jackal said, well, come on, he's wanted by the police, so he must be a bad guy. Kurt Busiek, who's written The Punisher, took it another way, and this is the one I'd really love to see. Kurt Busiek said, the Punisher's a serial killer.
Oh, hell yeah.
You know, very much, he's not a hero. He should never be considered a hero. You can write him doing positive things, but his character is a serial killer. And the more I think, the more I thought about that, the more not only is, yeah, does that make sense, but also, wow, what a great series that would be. Where instead of, you know, the cops going after him or a bunch of doofuses who can't catch him, you get the FBI who say, we're taking him down. He's killed over, you know, however many people. Granted,
a lot of them bad guys, but, you know, killing is killing.
And I also, whenever he fights with Spider-Man, Spider-Man is just morally against what he does. And that morality play is what always works for the story. It's why Punisher and Daredevil have such good stories because Punisher is about justice and Daredevil is about the law. Spider-Man is about responsibility. Punisher doesn't take any responsibility for what he does. They broke the law, they must die. And whenever you're having a hero and a villain, the conflict should be just more than one's a good guy and one's a bad guy. They should have some sort of deeper conflict, which makes it more interesting. And that's why I believe Punisher is one of Spider-Man's best villains. Joe.
I'd agree with that up until they overused him, because it was always, oh, Punisher's back. Every year he showed up from that first appearance, and they were always interesting when it happened. I remember, I think it was him, Nightcrawler, which was my first exposure to X-Men, and Punisher. And I can't remember the numbers, 161, 162.
Yes.
Punisher was getting ready to kill somebody, and all of a sudden, Spider-Man webs this thing, no killing, because he was using rubber bullets, which was amazing to have a gun that you could just switch to rubber bullets and back again,
It was invented by the comic code.
Yes. So now for my second one, and this is number 4, I am again going kind of sideways because I'd like to see Spider-Man fight any villain not associated with Spider-Man. And I'll give you 3, even though there's lots of them. I believe after 200, there was a really blah run where I think Shooter said, okay, everything's a standalone. And when they finally broke away from that, there was a throwdown between Spider-Man and Firelord.
Yeah, that was a long time after, though. That was
okay.
Tom DeFalco and Ron Friends. So that was after
you also got to remember,
run.
My brain is pretty much blotted out everything up until that. Although there's
I think you'd remember the whole Hobgoblin story.
No, there was a lot of things. But
nothing stops the Juggernaut.
Sorry, after he was with Dazzler, blah blah, nothing. But the fact that Spider-Man not only stopped and knocked out Firelord, and again, he was kind of he wasn't the Herald of Galactus, but they knew he was. And of course, they refer to that in Avengers, where the Avengers came to clean up after it, and they're all kind of amazed that Spider-Man knocked out Firelord. Even Thor thinking, hey, this young one has some mettle. You referred to another one on the list that took Spider-Man out of the doldrums when he went one-on-one with Juggernaut. And Juggernaut, what is Juggernaut? He's unstoppable, undefeatable. I mean, they really didn't stop him in that 2-parter that I talked about, where X-Force and Spider-Man teamed up in the 90s or early 80s.
That was 90s, because it was after Spider-Man #1.
So when Juggernaut came after, I believe he was going after Madam Web, Spider-Man went after him, and he didn't stop Juggernaut. I mean, he didn't defeat Juggernaut. He did stop him, and it's a very unique way he did it. And what was great back then, sidebar why I love Marvel, is the next time we saw Juggernaut, he was sitting in a bar drinking, and I think it was Wolverine, Cyclops, and somebody else. No, Colossus. It was when they got back from Secret Wars, and Colossus was all moody or whatever. And Gerald's Juggernaut just drinking, and he made the comment, it took me forever to dig out of that pit, but once I reached bottom, and now I'm sitting here drinking, and you guys want to fight? But, you go back to the original fight, and that was some ingenious fighting by Spider-Man. The fact that he was all in, and he would have died trying to stop Juggernaut, and he didn't. But he still won because of the way, and I don't think it's too spoiler warning to talk about something that old, but he basically, I don't know if Spider-Man, he was on Juggy's helmet, he had his eyes covered, Juggernaut was just bang, 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 and then Juggernaut inadvertently walked into some cement that was being used to lay a foundation, and he sunk straight down. So I don't know if that was by design from Spider-Man or that was just a happy accident.
Well, supposedly it was Spider-Man's plan.
I don't know. I've got to go dig that up because I kind of thought it was kind of a mistake, and it just so happened that it worked. But I'll even go all the way back to was it when he fought Doctor Doom way back in the early issues? We're talking not even into the 10s yet. Doctor Doom totally underestimated Spider-Man. He did not, again, a lot of these villains, when they run into Spider-Man, especially if they haven't been with him, they really underestimate Spider-Man. They think he's a joke. He jokes around too much, but they eventually get their asses handed to him. And that's what I love about it when Spider-Man runs up against another villain. Yeah, I think some of the guys like, the Spot or I'm trying to think of like, I don't know, Calypso, Human Fly, Grizzly, whatever. They know who they're fighting. And but when they're fighting somebody and you just think, oh yeah, no, this is going to be an easy fight, and it wasn't. Like Doctor Doom found out, his plans were thwarted by Spider-Man, and had it not been for the fortuitous arrival of Fantastic Four, Spider-Man may have been finished. Yeah, right. In the early Marvel days, they would have killed off a half-ass selling character. You just got to go with the disbelief and with the suspense. But and again, I don't know the next Doctor Doom fight with Spider-Man, but Doctor Doom gave him a little bit more respect. And I'm thinking the one that comes to mind, I'm sure there's something otherwise, was when they were doing the time travel in Marvel Team Up. I think Doom was involved in that somehow. Again, I'm going off memory. I don't know. But yeah, you put Spider-Man with any non-Spider-Man villain. That's why it was a blast watching him in the New Avengers. The one scene that I raved about in a previous podcast is that, well, I'll talk about it later because I think it deals with another villain on my list. But so yeah, you got tons of villains there. Just have them go one-on-one with Spidey. You got my attention.
All right, my number 4 is the Kingpin. And yes, Kingpin is best known now for being a Daredevil villain. But he got his start over on Spider-Man, and they rarely interact, but when they do, I do like the whole storyline where usually it's because Kingpin is the kingpin of crime. He's in charge of crime in New York City, and someone else is trying to take that mantle from him. And through the 80s, they really played with that a lot. They played with who was in charge of crime in New York City. His original storylines were around the Mystic Tablet, where if you could use the formula on the tablet, it would give you eternal life. And eventually Silvermane was the one who got his hands on the tablet, but that was all around the Kingpin. And I like that Kingpin, while he could go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man, that wasn't why I liked it. It's because Kingpin could outthink him and outmuscle him with his organization rather than just beating the tar out of him. And the best Kingpin stories are the ones where Kingpin doesn't throw a punch. He manipulates the situation like a crime lord. And I like villains who outthink the hero. I think that's something that's hard to do. I'm in a writers group on Facebook, and one person said, I'm writing a story about a person who's really smart. I'm not really smart. How can I show that this character's really smart? And there's a lot of stuff where with Sherlock Holmes, you never see what's going on inside Sherlock Holmes's head. It's, oh, I've solved the problem. And then he explains how he solved the problem. You don't show the steps of him getting there. You show what's already done. With Kingpin, his plan is in place. We don't see him putting the plan together. He's the kingpin of crime. He's in charge of crime. And we don't need to see all the different things he does. We just know that he has all this political power, all this social power, and he goes after Spider-Man in that way. And that's why
Was that apparent in the early Spider-Man issues? I see that a lot in the Daredevil ones, but from what I read in the Spider-Man ones, it really wasn't that apparent.
In the early ones, it was. It was later that, oh, he looks big and fat, but he's really like a sumo wrestler. And by the 70s, he would just punch people.
And see, that for me is, again, my golden age started at 178. So for me, there was a big head rush as they went into issue 200. And while Spider-Man's busy he figured out who that death of Aunt May was a ruse. And as he's going out, this Kingpin interferes with him and has quite possibly one of the best fights I'd ever seen in comics in my young 12-year-old mind, maybe 13 by then because it was 79. And that was, of course, in 197. And they just went toe-to-toe with each other. And had the time not run out, Kingpin would have won. He had a desk up. He was ready to destroy Spider-Man once and for all. And then Vanessa came in and said, "This is it. We're leaving." And Kingpin gave just, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, "Whereas men quake in fear from me, I quake in my love for you." And they leave. A much befuddled Spider-Man to brilliantly show up again in Daredevil when Frank Miller got a hold of him. Again, the type of continuity as a kid that I love because I knew what happened in 197, even though I wasn't aware of a lot of the early Kingpin stuff. Because, again, all I saw was, he's a big guy. Yeah, you may think I'm fat. No, I'm solid muscle. So that's kind of interesting. Again, I'll have to dig out my essentials and go check out some of these early appearances.
And then remember in the 80s, after Frank Miller played with them, he was kind of brought back into Spider-Man when they had the whole gang war thing. You had the Rose and you had the Hobgoblin, and they were all fighting over control of the New York crime in New York. And they used him as kind of, he's the smart guy hanging back, letting all these idiots fight it out. So, Joe, who is next on your list?
What you said is kind of how this next guy appeared in Spider-Man. He basically hired some idiots to let them fight it out. And I'm talking about what people arguably say is the number one villain of Spider-Man of all time. And I'm talking, of course, about the Green Goblin. Now, for me, if you remember, and this is kind of a mini Ask the Strode, as you know, my first beloved issue is 178. Who was the Green Goblin at that time?
At that time, it was Harry Osborn's psychiatrist. Yeah. And I remember being so proud of myself that I had figured that out before they revealed it.
Yeah, Dr. Barton Hamilton. And again, I was able to go backwards enough to figure out what was going on. Because I think one of the early ones was when Peter picked up Harry from one of his sessions and the guy goes, "So that's Peter Parker. Interesting." But when I got to it, again, 178, by 179, it was Green Goblin, Silvermane fighting, and I think by 180, the big reveal. And I knew who Green Goblin was because early on, my old partner, Pat, borrowed me his Amazing Spider-Man collection. So I was able to read some of the Spider-Man stuff. I remember reading in magazines like Dynamite about why Green Goblin was so dangerous because he was the only foe at that time, and I'm talking Norm Osborn, that knew who Spider-Man was. However, he had a mental illness, and a lot of times when he was normal Norm Osborn, he did not remember that. And that's what always made him so, how would you say, insidious, because there's Norm Osborn, but he's the Green Goblin, but he doesn't remember. And when he did remember, stuff happened. And of course, we all remember the number one thing he's done. And I'm not talking about knocking up Gwen Stacy. Hopi never happened. I actually have a reason I think that happened, and it has more to do with rape than it does anything else, but I'm not going to get into it. But yes, he killed Gwen Stacy. And so that was always a stigma. I read the whole Green Goblin saga with his son, Harry. You go forward. I think it was Peter Parker's Spectacular 200 where Harry redonned the Green Goblin saga or costume to be sort of a pseudo hero. And then, of course, you had the infamous issue where Norm came back. And it was, again, kind of moping away, but he was revealed to everybody. I'm the Green Goblin. You guys were faked out by my death. And he attacked. And Norm has been just a dangerous thorn in the side of Marvel. I didn't know if I really appreciated that, but when Bendis, what he did with Norm Osborn during the whole Secret Invasion and Dark Avengers and making him a public figure. And again, this leads to one of my favorite Spider-Man moments in New Avengers when Norm Osborn was dicking around and they were trying to escape from the Dark Avengers, and Spider-Man just out of the plane, I'll take care of this. And there's a scene where everybody's like, no, and he is already down and he's just going to rumble. That's the way Spider-Man should be whenever he sees Norm Osborn. He is just going to go balls out, and we should, I mean, he probably won't, but really, there should be almost a death wish that's Peter Parker, Spider-Man should have for Norm Osborn because of the grief and the bullshit he's had to suffer through. And it's kind of like in pro wrestling when you know these guys have history and they're going to face each other, even though they're not necessarily in a match together. That's the way I see it every time Norm Osborn shows up. And I remember beefing about this in something, again, I'll give a Joe prize to whoever can find it in the podcast. But in the New Avengers, there was a scene where Spider-Man's trying to explain to Captain America, why he doesn't like Norm Osborn. He will never like Norm Osborn. And you would think somebody would put two and two together. Oh, that's right. He killed your girlfriend. Especially since back then everybody knew who Spider-Man was. And it really should be, hey, you know what? Green Goblin's involved here. We need to keep Spider-Man out of it. That's how unhealthy Spider-Man should be when he sees this guy. And to this day, I'm going to have to Wikipedia. I have no idea where Norm is now. I think he's in another body hiding out by the other Osborns.
Yes, he is the Red Goblin now.
Ah, see? So something's happened. I'm going to have to go check that out. So for me, number 3 is the Green Goblin. The history is rich. It's varied. We've talked about it in the past. How Ditko wanted no one to know who the Green Goblin was. We found out who he was. I mean, that cover where the Green Goblin has Peter Parker in a coil and his mask is off. How could you not, even years later, and I knew everything that was going on, and I saw that cover, I geeked out. Just amazing. So yeah, he's not number 1 or number 2, but he's definitely up there with in the top 5.
I have Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. Actually, I have the Green Goblin as my number 3. And the reason he's not higher is because of the fact that they brought him back. He's much more interesting than he was before. They've done a lot with him, but I still to this day think he should have stayed dead.
Yes, for all the things I said, I agree with you on that. I could have lived. That really dilutes the issue that Gwen dies in. The fact that he has come back, and in as you know, he cannot be punished or die or whatever because they'll always want to bring him back for something.
But I also named the Green Goblin because of the fact that Norman Osborn wasn't the only Green Goblin. When I first started reading, Harry had become the Green Goblin. And nobody believed him because, well, he's all hopped up on goofballs. He was crazy.
I remember that issue too. Peter Parker, Spider-Man is Peter Parker. Oh shit! He's just revealed my identity. What am I gonna do? Yeah, right, Harry.
And then they had Harry's psychiatrist become the Green Goblin, and there was actually a theory at the time in the letters pages and fan magazines. And this is why fan theories should be fun and not put into the comic, that the Green Goblin was kind of this elemental evil force that could never die. Yes, Norman Osborn. Then it went to Harry Osborn. Then it went to the psychiatrist. Who's going to be the Green Goblin next? Because there has to be a Green Goblin. In the early days, when he was kind of the behind-the-scenes bad guy in Spider-Man, and the mystery around him, I liked that. And once and for all, I am going to put this to bed. No, Steve Ditko did not leave Marvel because Stan said he wanted the Green Goblin to be Norman Osborn. There is this theory out there that Ditko left because he wanted the Green Goblin to just be a regular schmo, and Stan wanted it to be somebody famous. Steve already did the story where one of the big bad guys turned out to be just a regular schmo. He wasn't going to do it again. The reason Steve Ditko left is because, hey, look, there's Spider-Man pillows and Spider-Man toys and a Spider-Man TV show, and why aren't I getting any royalties? And Martin Goodman said, yeah, we'll talk about it.
And they never did.
And after about a year, Steve said, well, I guess I'm never going to get the royalties, so screw you guys, I'm gone.
When did Norm Osborn first appear?
Norman Osborn first appeared when Peter Parker went to college.
So that would have been... Oh, there it is. I found it. Amazing Spider-Man 14 in 1964.
Yes. No, that's when the Green Goblin appeared.
Oh, I want to know when Norm appeared.
It was when Peter Parker went to college, because that's when they introduced the new cast.
Yep.
Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy and...
Yeah. It says Norman Osborn, Amazing Spider-Man 37.
Yep.
And so basically that idea, it's going to be somebody famous. It doesn't quite hold up to snuff because Norm hadn't even been appeared yet. And I'm trying to find the great reveal that I was talking about when and I'm just going to go to Atomic Avenue while you talk, where they figured out it is Norm.
39.
39. That's there it is. Look at that cover. Oh.
Yeah. Johnny Romita doing a Ditko impression, and there is still a part of me that wishes he would have kept doing it, because I actually liked his art better when he was doing his Ditko impression than when he finally felt comfortable enough to do his romance comic style. But
only $500 near mint if you want to get that issue.
But anytime the Green Goblin showed up, it was a huge deal. It was scary. After the reveal, he only showed up 2 more times. In the drug story, and then in the story where he killed Gwen Stacy. They didn't use him much because there was such power in that character. And if he would have stayed dead and they would have continued passing the mantle on, I think it would have been more powerful for Spider-Man.
Well, yeah.
Overall,
it was fun when Hobgoblin showed up because it was, and even the little talked about Green Goblin miniseries where I think it was Philip Urich.
Yeah, Phil Urich's son.
He found a
was going to be a good guy.
Yeah, until it finally and wasn't there a story where Ben wrote like a thing about trying to expose on Norm Osborn?
Yeah,
which was fun reading. But yeah, they took a lot away. I think Cory and I are on the same page on this guy.
And the only reason the Green Goblin came back from the dead was because they had written themselves into a hole with the Clone Saga. Nothing they could think of would be a big enough reveal after they'd been building for, 2 years, 3 years? Until finally they said, all right, let's have it be Norman Osborn behind it all.
Yeah.
And I think what Bendis did afterward was very much making chicken salad out of chicken shit. Because when he came back, I don't know about you, but I was like, oh, Jesus God, this is terrible. But he's back. We have to deal with it, so they've done good stories with it. My number 2, because you brought it up, and then I'll let you do your number 2, is the Hobgoblin. And I have Hobgoblin above Green Goblin for one simple reason. I think the Hobgoblin, even though they screwed up the mystery, I think it was handled much better. I liked how Roger Stern, when he created the character, would just drop hints here and there. And the Hobgoblin, while he didn't know Peter Parker's secret identity, was still scary. When he showed up, it was scary. He was violent. And it wasn't it's like Venom, he's going to kill people. He just had this feeling of menace, and there was a feeling that he could beat the shit out of Spider-Man whenever he felt like it. He was smarter than Norman Osborn. He was craftier than Norman Osborn. There was a big mystery behind it. And then when, Marvel revealed the mystery, who cares? Roger Stern did that 3-part miniseries that basically Hobgoblin Lives, that kind of reset the table so that he could reveal who he had wanted as as the Hobgoblin the whole time. And to me, that worked perfectly.
Who?
It was Roderick Kingsley, who was a character he had created in during his run on Peter Parker, and he had the character around. And once he said, okay, here are all the clues, here's how it all added up, you look at it and you go, damn, he did set everything up for this reveal. But then Marvel, he left Spider-Man, and Tom DeFalco didn't want to use his reveal, so instead it's Ned Leeds. No, it's not. But Ned Leeds is dead. Yeah, that's why it's not him.
He got better. They all got better. Harry got better.
No, Ned Leeds never got better.
Harry got better. He died in Peter Parker 200.
Yeah, now he's back. But Ned Leeds still dead.
He's around. You know he is.
No, his clone came back and then faded away. And
I know. Superboy punched a wall somewhere. Dr. Doom reset everything in Secret Wars. Something happened.
But it's weird that I like Hobgoblin better than Green Goblin. That's why it's a Fave 5 and not a Best 5. Hobgoblin, whenever Hobgoblin showed up, I don't know how the back issues are now, but I remember at the time, Hobgoblin appearance. Oh my God! That comic is now worth 10 times as much as it was. And do you remember the one that if it had the little rub-on tattoos, it was worth more?
Yeah.
And I never saw any of the comics. When it came out, I never saw any of the tattoos in the comics. So it was like, if it's got the tattoos in it, it's worth twice as much. Well, then fuck you.
I'm trying to figure the issue here as I'm flipping through.
I do believe it is 236.
Yeah, I'm on 245, and that's a reveal, which is the 4th appearance, but that was, I think, a MacGuffin.
Yeah.
So let me go back one page.
Yeah, it was somebody got arrested, and then you find out the end of the issue. It wasn't him, because remember issue 250 and 251 was Peter Parker fighting him, and he ripped off the mask underwater, but the Hobgoblin got away.
And it was fun, too, because we had no idea who it was, and that was part of the fun.
I remember at the time we would sit down and go, okay, because I had a friend who was convinced it was J. Jonah Jameson, just convinced.
Huh.
It was, no, because Jonah was here when this was happening, and on and on and on and on and on. And we treated it like a serious mystery.
238, near mid price around 200. Okay. I'm assuming with the tattoo. Number 2, that's 239 is like $42.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Joe, who is your number 2?
My guy, I just say Amazing Spider-Man 3, and you know who it is.
Well, that's Dr. Octopus.
Of course. And I love Stan Lee talking about this. He says, usually in creating a villain, the first thing I would think of was a name, and then I would try to think of, well, now that I got the name, who's the character going to be and what will he do? And came up with Octopus and a couple extra arms and so on and so on. His first appearance was in number 3. He still, I believe, is the only villain he's the first villain to defeat Spider-Man, if I recall right.
Yes.
And
And
what I love,
ripped his mask off.
and what I love is the mistake that they made in the printing where he's talking about, I think that was Superman. So to me, somewhere there was a Superman Dr. Octopus fight that we've never seen. But they just, sorry, that's Alan Moore's right. It all happened. Anyways, yeah, that was another brilliant scene because here you are, issue 3, and he basically tried to fight Octopus, and Octopus knocked him out, and oh my God, it's Peter Parker, which years later, at the end of the dark run of Spider-Man before they reconned his marriage, Peter David had the issue where Dr. Octopus went ballistic, realizing it was him the whole time. I got defeated by a high schooler. I had him in my grasp. Oh, and he went freaky. For me, Dr. Octopus cements the place because when he shows up, not so much in the early appearances, although he was always kind of a manic hero, but when he showed up and they started taking him a little more seriously than just you're a fat guy with arms. You're actually one of the most brilliant men on the planet who knows about radioactivity. He got a little more interesting. Frank Miller did a wonderful annual. Again, our buddy the Punisher showed up, and Dr. Octopus basically knocked him out like that. The aforementioned book that I read. Yeah, even the mares haunt me. Yeah, well, whatever. I think that we've mopied that one to death. But and when he showed up,
it happened.
I know, she even acknowledges it. He kind of gets all droopy-eyed when I think they met once, didn't they? And they were kind of like, Octopus, May, these little hearts popping out of him. But when I think they brought Dr. Octopus in during the whole storyline when Sue Richards' second child was in danger during the John Byrne run. Again, before that, I think there was one of my favorite issues was that would have been the turning point of Dr. Octopus when Spider-Man so thoroughly defeated Dr. Octopus that he basically just yelled at him, despite you being my most dangerous villain, I've defeated you time and time again, and it's always going to be that way, which caused Octopus to lose his mind. And Byrne played upon that, brought Octopus in. We saw a little bit of the brilliance behind Otto, and then, of course, he went nuts when he saw Spider-Man. Just a lot of fun. Yeah, even, was it it had to be after the marriage, but when we thought Dr. Octopus got blown up by a nuke, how did he save himself?
That was the same story.
Yeah.
And he wrapped himself up in his arms because, remember, his arms were what he used to work with radioactive material. So he wrapped himself in his arms to survive being at ground zero of a nuclear blast.
Yeah. Well, and even when he wanted to get adamantium to make his arms adamantium, that was scary. He was able to activate his mechanical arms remotely. I mean,
that was the one where I really went, "Oh, that is cool."
Yeah. So and again, the crowning achievement was when he became the superior Octopus. Not only was his plan to defeat Spider-Man utterly brilliant and happened, and we never even saw it until the big reveal, but damn it, he was a superior Spider-Man. He was good at it. And so good, they give him his own series now, which is kind of cool. Some of the things he came up with were like, why didn't Spider-Man think of this? And I can't even remember the woman who fell in love with him.
She's actually in Superior Spider-Man.
Yes, yeah. But even she would, when she was dealing with Peter Parker, I need to do this, and how am I going to? And she would come up with solutions like, why didn't you just think of this? Why is it such a big deal? You got to run away, So, Superior Spider-Man's back. Dr. Octopus, I mean, he's in Spider-Man's body now, not, again, go see the second Clone Saga. We referred to it, but this body, because Otto is so damn smart, he didn't fade away. That whole run of Superior Spider-Man was just fun, because not only were people reacting to the fact that Spider-Man's a little different, when Octopus actually killed somebody, and you had the whole Avengers sitting around, we got to do something. And Wolverine's like, what are you talking about? We've all done that. We just got to wait and see what happens. To kind of sideball things where I think Wolverine or somebody said, oh, we need you to mind check Spider-Man. Make sure no, we don't do that. Oh, how convenient. Get it to him on whatever. But anytime, and again, he's in his own book now, so I guess we're a little bit safe. But anytime Octopus showed up, especially in that last run when he was in the Living Brain, he to me is probably Spider-Man's most deadly villain. Even over into the movie universe, the actor who played him in the second Tobey Maguire movie, absolutely brilliant. You just loved it. I loved the fight they had. You know, you watch the movies and you realize there's no way they're going to be joking during these fights, but the energy was just so kinetic. And there you see Octopus hanging off a building and they zoom out and there's Spider-Man waiting to meet him. Just, yeah, he by far is my number 2, but not my number 1.
With he that is my number 1.
Well, okay, let's hear it.
All right. First off, one of the things that Stan Lee did in the 90s when he was putting together ideas for the movies, he tied their origins together. And the more I think about, and even John Byrne played with it a little, but the more I think about it, the more it works in that they're both people who got their powers in an accident. And in many ways, Dr. Octopus's childhood is the opposite of Peter Parker. Dr. Octopus was abused as a child and then smothered by his mother. Whereas Peter Parker's parents died, and he, was taken in by Aunt May, and Uncle Ben. They taught him right from wrong. Whereas Dr. Octopus's mother just taught him, basically she kind of mentally abused him. And if you read this origin story of Dr. Octopus, his thoughts are very much like Peter Parker's in Amazing Fantasy 15, where he's the smartest guy in the room, and he's mad because everybody makes fun of him and treats him poorly. And when he gets his powers, he becomes a villain. Peter Parker gets his powers, becomes a hero. And they've kind of, for all the talk of the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus is Spider-Man's main villain. He's always showing up. There's a connection between them and their powers. As each has gotten more powerful and more intelligent, they use it against each other to the point where there were times when they've got kind of a mutual respect. But Octopus has been humiliated by him so many times that until the Superior Spider-Man story, and even that Superior Spider-Man story was, this will be my final victory. In many ways, the best villain for a hero is their opposite. And the movies really play off that. But in Batman is all order, Joker is all chaos. When you look at Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus, they're almost mirror images of each other in that they had similar childhoods, similar ways to power, but they reacted to it very differently. Also, Dr. Octopus has never been shown to be stupid. He's never been shown to be goofy. Even in the 80s, where they really piled on a lot of goofiness on characters, Dr. Octopus was treated very seriously. When they gave his backstory, it showed why psychologically he acted the way he did. And in many stories, when it's done right, Dr. Octopus thinks he's the good guy. And that's the other big key to a villain. They think that they are justified. They think that what they're doing is right. Dr. Octopus may break the law, but he's doing it because, well, I need to do this experiment. I need to do this. He's never been I will take over the world. There are times when they treat him like, he's just a regular criminal. But when it's done right, he's not robbing the bank just to be rich. He's robbing the bank because he's got this experiment he wants to do, or this other thing he wants to do. And it's why I always enjoy a Dr. Octopus story when the writer takes a little extra time, just like Dan Slott did. Dan Slott just perfectly played with the fact that they're mirror images of each other. And if Peter Parker wouldn't have had Uncle Ben die, he would have been just like Doc Octopus. He would have been, I'm in it for the money. I'm in it for the fame. You people are all terrible. You treated me like crap, and now I'll show you. Dr. Octopus, if he would have had a different upbringing, as you see in Superior Spider-Man, once he sees Peter Parker's social network and the people who care about him and understand why he does what he does, they've erased that from his memory. Because once he's got that in his memory, he's not going to be a good villain anymore. But that's why he may have been the superior Spider-Man, but Peter Parker is the real Spider-Man. So that's why, in my book, Dr. Octopus is my favorite Spider-Man villain. Joe, who's your favorite?
Well, my number one is just, you're going to hear the name and you're going to shudder. And he's just terrible. Who would spoil and ruin someone's lunch with a rubber glove sandwich, or spoil a dog's walk by putting a no dogs allowed sign on a hydrant? A rubber glove sandwich, hard to bite, difficult to chew, and impossible to swallow. Who could possibly be Spider-Man's greatest number one villain? Do you want to spoil it for him, Cory?
I don't know who you're talking about.
Of course, the spoiler from the very first Spidey Super Stories segment in Electric Company. Spidey links the clues to the spoiler, a mischievous villain who aims to spoil people's fun. And Spider-Man defeats him, but the victory is bittersweet. A wall got spoiled when Spider-Man knocks the spoiler through it. And you know what else makes this one of the more interesting Spider stories, Cory? Do ya? It's a rare crossover between J. Arthur Crank and Easy Reader. Crank is busy looking for Spider-Man, but all he runs upon is Easy Reader. Crank never finds him and walks off frustrated.
Top to bottom, left to right, reading stuff is out of sight.
And that's my number one.
Well, you know who else likes Spider-Man?
The Bookworm, Little Miss Muffet, Queen Bee, the Funny Bunny, other foes of Spider-Man during Spider Super Stories?
Or even the ones that were not in Spidey Super Stories, like the White Rabbit.
Or the Mouse, or the Sitter, or the Hum.
What was the kid who dressed in the frog costume?
He was the frog.
Oh, okay. No, it's these guys, our sponsors. That's right, here at the Solitaire Rose Radio Network, we have ads, and our first sponsor is me. That's right, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. I have my first book out with Dangerous Dan Moore. It's the first 100 strips of our online web strip, Worldwide News, the story of the lowest rated cable news network. And you can get yourself a copy with commentary, with all sorts of extras, with signatures and everything. Just email Dan over at lordshadowflame@gmail.com. Our top sponsor, who's been with us since day one, is DreamHost. DreamHost.com. You need yourself a website, and DreamHost.com is the #1 web host in the whole known universe. Just head over to DreamHost.com, put in the code KRAYZ, KRAYZ, get $20 off your first year. How can you beat that? Our other sponsor is Graze, Graze. Grays.com. Healthy snacks for a healthy lifestyle. Just head over to Grays, put in the code CORYS 3R5P. Your first and fifth box are free. You could get them weekly. You could get them bi-weekly. You could get them monthly. You could just order a whole bunch of them. It's great stuff to keep you away from the vending machine at work. Now, if you would like to leave a comment for any of the podcasts that we do, we'd love those. Go ahead and email us at solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com, or you can call 952-856-0519. Operators are standing by. Okay, it's just a place that we'll record your calls, but we'll play them on the air. We'll answer your questions. We love getting feedback. Tell us what you think. Ask a question. Suggest a topic. Be a guest. Send us your stuff. SolitaireRoseNetwork@gmail.com. If you would like to advertise on any of the Solitaire Rose radio shows, you can. Just email us at SolitaireRoseNetwork@gmail.com. Subject advertising. Thanks. And even though we have no idea when this is dropping, Cory is probably working on 5 or 6 other podcasts as we speak. Here's him talking about them. The Solitaire Rose Radio Network has all sorts of podcasts for you. There's, of course, Crazy Comics and Stories, where myself and Crazy Joe Ryder get together once a week to talk comics. We review comics, we talk about upcoming comics, we talk about comics history. Anything that has to do with comics, we're going to talk about. We also have Series in Review, where we review series and kind of give a DVD commentary of past comics that we've enjoyed. There is also Solitaire Rose Radio. Solitaire Rose Radio is my solo show where I discuss upcoming comics, past comics, comics history, and interview comics creators. These are all at crazycomics.solitairerose.com. There's also the podcast I'm proudest of. That's Novelcast, where I take the novels that I have written and turn them into audiobooks. That's at novels.solitairerose.com. Over at Bad Advice, myself, Dan Moore, and Wolfie B. Bad take your questions and give you bad advice. It's at badadvice.solitairerose.com. Now, don't think that I'm doing all the podcasts, because there's also Scrabbling Across the West by Dave Koffel and Stephanie Koffel. Dave is a musician and Stephanie is his wife. They travel the country performing music and playing Scrabble over at scrabbling.solitairerose.com. And finally, the newest member of the Solitaire Rose Radio group, that's Fantastic Forecast, where myself and host of For the Love of Comics, Adam Vermillion, go over the series The Fantastic Four, 4 issues at a time. That's available at fantasticforecast.solitairerose.com. If you would like to advertise on any of these podcasts, you can. Just email me at solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com. Thanks. And now we get to Joe's favorite part of the show, although he cannot be specific.
Nope.
Joe, what are you snacking on?
Right now I have some delicious cranberry juice that's diet. I have my last bottle of Rat Bastard Root Beer, and of course, whatever I'm selling on eBay. Krayz. The only thing really to mention is that unless you're dropping this during one of my various surgeries, anything online, if you see you're interested in, let me know. I'll cut you a deal because you are a beloved listener of this here show. I may throw in something special, like, I don't know, maybe could be something cool. Like, let's see over here. I've got a pop figure of Steve Trevor from the Wonder Woman movie. Or it could be something like Scotch magic tape. I mean, this is like 25 yards of magic. So just check it out. Krayz. I've renewed the store for another year, so Lord knows what I'll be selling.
Yeah, my favorite snack right now is the peanut butter filled pretzel nuggets.
Yeah, the cheese are okay too.
And I have Jelly Belly pancake and maple syrup jelly beans.
Yum.
Although they don't really taste like pancake, they taste more like butter and maple. But that's good enough.
Good enough.
And now we get to Joe's favorite. No, we did Joe's favorite part of the show. Now we get to my favorite part of the show. No, not where we do reviews of lotion. Just going to let that one sit there. That's Freaking and Geeking. Joe, when it comes to Spider-Man villains, what are you freaking on?
You know, with all the stuff Spider-Man's gone through, it's kind of like in the second Spider-Man movie, the current run. It's like Nick Fury looks at him and, bitch, you've been into space. Spider-Man's done so much for so many. There's almost no way I can buy that people aren't going to. I mean, there's always going to be someone, yeah, I don't like him. But it's kind of like, how can you not view him as a hero? I kind of miss the early days when, especially in the Essentials, where he was just a ground level guy fighting normal crimes. Peter Parker's been at the top of the world like Tony Stark. His empire's collapsed. Whereas Peter Parker, I think, took the blame of that. Spider-Man's still out. I don't envy the current Spider-Man writer. I thought he's doing some good stuff. And again, as we're recording this, God knows what he'd be doing in the future. In some ways, I kind of miss those early days where Spider-Man was more of a street-level hero. But, now he's kind of like, I could see him being called upon by, hey, the FF needs your help, or the Avengers need your help, or, we need you to help us out. I don't know if they could get away with, like with Tony Stark, this Iron Man died, so we got a new one, even though it's the same guy. I think only certain people know he's Peter Parker now. That for a while everybody knew, and then nobody knew, and then it happened as he revealed people, and then he made the mistake of revealing it to everybody, so now anybody can figure it out. But again, it's kind of pining for the simpler days of Spider-Man. It's just fun to read those early stories. And it's almost not believable to think that they'll ever go back to that again. I can't see Spider-Man being a street-level hero because he is one of the preeminent heroes in the Marvel universe. Just like in Amazing Spider-Man 1, when Fantastic Four were thinking, how strong he is as a kid. What's he going to be like when he's grown up? Well, we've talked about it. Spidey works as a kid, but in the comic, he's all grown up. How about you, Mr. Strode? And also, I like it with one Spider book, maybe a few tag on. Don't go crazy with Spider-Man. You're learning it from the X-Men, where you diluted X-Men to a point where it's unreadable, and now it's finally getting back to being readable without 500 books. You don't need 500 Spider-Man books. I'm not talking the Marvel Adventure from IDW, which is actually fun. Or even if you dare try another Ultimate Verse. Those were fun. But don't dilute too many Spider-Man books. I don't mind miniseries, fine, bring another Spider-Geddon event. And I don't like what you did with Spider-Gwen, but keep it simple, stupids. Think they heard that? Probably not. How about you, Cory? What freaks you out about Spider-Man? Other than the fact that when they do Electric Company on disc, they inevitably never put on Spider-Man because they don't have the rights to do it anymore.
The one thing that, as I go through Spider-Man, that freaks me out is there are so many, just piles and piles of lame, stupid villains that showed up once and never again. And while it was...
We're not talking about a guy named Joe who appeared in issue number 38, the one before the big reveal with the Green Goblin.
The last issue by Ditko, by the way.
Yeah.
But no, I mean characters like Mindworm, Cyclone, the Mirage.
I think he got scourged.
Oh, yeah. But they were used to good effect in Superior Foes of Spider-Man in that here's a bunch of, second raters as a team, kind of a comedy bit. Yeah. And I really liked that. But there are so many just lame, stupid villains that Spider-Man's had over the years that it's okay if we just forget them. It really is.
Or better yet, if Spider-Man fought them and he didn't remember them.
Yeah. It's okay if Will-o'-the-Wisp doesn't show up again. It's really okay if Ramrod never shows up again. It's really okay if Razorback never shows again.
What? Is he a superhero?
After 50-some years, some of the villains, man, some of them you just kind of shake your head and go, oof. Now, one of the
I'm
things
glad you didn't mention the Big Wheel, because he was always my favorite.
one of the things they did a few years ago, they went back and they kind of reset all of the major villains, but it's already starting to get convoluted again. So remember that the reason some of these villains are so important isn't because they have a long backstory. It's because they are tragic in some way. You know, the lizard's not a bad guy. It's when Kurt Connors took that serum, he reverted back to a more primal self. The best villains are the ones that have a tragic backstory, and that's the one thing I liked in the movies. They actually worked really hard on making it so the villain isn't the villain because he's a villain. There's a reason why he acts the way he does. And that's one of the great things about Spider-Man's villains, is that many of them are misunderstood or they have a tragic backstory. And when you forget it and it's just, well, why is this guy a bad guy? Because Spider-Man needs to beat the tar out of somebody this month. Yeah, put a little more effort into it. Joe, what are you geeking about when it comes to Spider-Man?
He was my first. I've said it many times in the past, and I'll say it many times in the future. And I might as well drop it now. Every time I interview somebody, I always ask them what their secret comic book origin is. What was the comic book or books that got you not just reading comics, but collecting them the way we do, the way you, the listeners, do, the way I got to get month after month, or wait for the graphic novel or whatever. For me, Amazing Spider-Man 178. I oftentimes think about dropping Amazing Spider-Man. My timing sucks because when it happened, that was Todd McFarlane showing up in the first Venom. And of course, I didn't start picking it up again until 213. I pretty much resigned myself to never collecting all of Amazing Spider-Man, but I have them all. Most of them. I have every essential. I have them on Marvel Universe. Wait, is that right? Is that their online?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Marvel Unlimited.
Unlimited. Thank you. Some of the stories, like we talked about, from 203 to Juggernaut showing up, those are those one-shot villains we probably don't need to see anymore. But I think we at the old shop, there was one guy, I think was it Jim Thole? I don't even know if he knows that podcast. We're dropping his name doesn't mean anything, but he collected Marvels. He'd been collecting Marvels since almost the beginning. He bought almost every Marvel, with the exception of like when they swallowed Malibu and things like that. And he even had a friend who he had been collecting Uncanny X-Men forever. So Jim always picked up 2 Uncanny X-Men. And his friend does your friend read these? Nope. Oh, so that's why he doesn't care about like the big crossover events? Nope, he just wants it. And I think there are certain books I will probably always read, always collect. Some of them are based on creators like Savage Dragon, Eric Larson. Some of them just don't come out regularly, like Tales of the Bean World from Larry Malder. But Amazing Spider-Man is one that I feel I almost have to just buy. Even if I get to the point, I mean, there was a whole run right after, when did they mopey out the existence of Spider-Man's marriage? Brand New Day, that's what it's called. There's a whole point of that Brand New Day. I admit it. I never read it. Cory asked me time and time again, did you read it? Did you read it? No, I never read it. Matter of fact, I think I got rid of it during the Purge. But I can go read it on Marvel Unlimited. I'll have times where I will probably stop reading it, but I will always have it and I'll always pick it up again, in some form or another. And I do have that Spider-Man 178. It's slabbed, and it's mostly for memory's sake, just because I know I'll always have it. And I forget, what did I get? Like a 7.8 on it? Yeah, I read the snot out of that baby. And it just even now I'm trying. I don't want to do another 2-hour podcast about my memories of those early years, about hunting down comics, discovering Greg Ketter's first shop, things like that. But that, to me, Spider-Man was my first. And so I'll always have a soft spot for him. Mr. Strode, how about you? What do you geek on when you contemplate Spider-Man?
Spider-Man is kind of a constant. I started because of the Fantastic Four. Well, there have been times when the Fantastic Four wasn't published. Any comic book character I can look over, there's always a Spider-Man book. And even when one of the Spider-Man books sucks, somebody's doing something good with Spider-Man. When Denny O'Neil was writing Amazing Spider-Man, and it blew, Roger Stern and Bill Mantlo were doing Spectacular Spider-Man, and those were fun. And Bill Mantlo and Chris Claremont were doing Marvel Team Up, and those were fun. Spider-Man is one of those characters, I think a lot like Batman, in that he's so pervasive now that everybody knows him. But the core of Spider-Man is so different from other characters in that most characters are doing it for justice. Spider-Man does it out of guilt. He didn't stop the criminal who killed his uncle. That should reverberate through everything. I don't care if it's been 56 years. I don't care if it's been 17 years in the comics world. That should always be the core of Spider-Man. And good writers know you've got to put that in. But also the thing about his villains, and I talked about it previously, his villains aren't bad guys because they're bad guys because they're bad guys. The best Spider-Man villains are more complicated than that. They come from an area of one different turn and they would have been good guys. It's why I think one of the great characters that they had was the Prowler. That was my first Spider-Man story I read. But when you read it, it's, Hobie Brown's created this suit, and he is mistaken for a criminal because he's doing something. And while he keeps being thought of as a criminal, he's a good guy, much like Spider-Man. Spider-Man for, most of the late 60s and 70s. It was, Spider-Man's really a good guy, but everybody hates him because of J. Jonah Jameson. And the other thing about Spider-Man is he's got the best supporting cast in comics, and I wish they used it all the time. Robbie Robertson, J. Jonah Jameson, Mary Jane Watkins, Flash Thompson, although he's not around anymore, Harry Osborn. These characters are rich, interesting characters with a long history, and it shows this growth. And it leads to Brian Wilson, who's older than us and was reading comics back in the 60s, talked about when he read Spider-Man, he'd skip the fight scenes because he wanted to get to the Peter Parker stuff. And I think when Spider-Man's done right, you care about Peter Parker.
I'll second that too, because when Gruber borrowed me his Spider-Man, I really wanted to read what was going on between him and Gwen Stacy, even though I knew she was going to die, because I'd never read any of this interaction. The how they went out, how they disliked each other, how they started going out. Yeah, the fights were secondary. And he didn't even have a complete run, so I'd be like, okay, I'm going to skip 2 issues, but what in the meanwhile is happening with the subplot? And
it's the soap opera that drove it. And I think some of that was the way Stan wrote comics. If you look at what he wrote in the 50s, the stuff he liked doing were the comedy books and the soap opera books. So when he started doing superheroes, he brought that stuff in. Spider-Man would wisecrack, and there'd always be a soap opera going on. And Stan, even when he would teach people how to write, the example he would use was, your character has to make a choice. Character is defined by the choices. So, with Spider-Man, Aunt May's had a heart attack and he's got to get the medicine to her, but Dr. Octopus is attacking a bank. Spider-Man has to figure out how to save his aunt while saving people. That's the essence of character. And in a lot of ways, that was the best use of that, because many of the other Marvel characters, Daredevil was kind of a second-rate Spider-Man. Iron Man, he didn't have much of a personality until the 70s. Spider-Man always had a personality. There was always stuff going on. And while my heart goes to the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man is what I think of when I think of Marvel. And I think his villains, you said that you had trouble coming up with the list. I had trouble paring it down to 5. When I started my list, I had 30. And most of it was all of the Ditko villains, and then a few of the ones since then. But you pick any of the Ditko villains, and they're interesting. Any of them. You pick any of the Ramita villains. Even the Rhino is interesting now. He wasn't before, but he is now. I think Spider-Man is also something where writers can do their best work. I never liked Roger Stern's writing as much as when he was doing Spider-Man. I never liked David Michelinie's work as much as when he did Spider-Man. Brian Bendis, that run on Ultimate Spider-Man, that was the last comic where it's like, oh God, it's not coming out fast enough. And it would come out 18 times a year, and I still, I need it faster. Bring it on, bring it on, bring it on. There's just something to the core of that character. At its heart, it's a very simple character. He made a mistake, and now he's making up for it. Just like Batman. His parents were killed, he has to stop crime. Don't ever lose that core, and you're always going to be successful. Well, believe it or not, kids, you've listened to us blather on about Spider-Man for an hour and a half.
Good for you.
And as we say every week, the comic we like the least, we still like better than the comic that you like the most. Joe?
Yeah, I don't even have a Spider-Man joke. Hang on a second. Let me see what I can find here. Spider-Man joke. All right. Oh, 42 best Spider-Man jokes. Are you ready?
No.
Why doesn't Spider-Man have a data plan for his phone? He's always connected to the web. You want more, or should you just hit my music?
I'm hitting your music.